My father burned my diploma at tea dinner to force me to sign my inheritance over to my sister, but he didn't know my silence was a trap, and by the time the flames finally died down, he had already triggered a secret clause that would cost him millions. At my graduation dinner, my father did not raise a toast. He raised a lighter, holding my diploma over a candle. He told me that if I truly loved this family, I would sign everything over to my sister. The paper curled and turned to ash on the white tablecloth. Everyone expected me to scream, but instead, I smiled. I knew something they did not know. By the time that my name is Savannah Hayes, and I am sitting at the head of a long mahogany table, in the center of the Gilded Oak, the most expensive restaurant in Copperfield, California. The air conditioning is humming a low, artificial note that vibrates against the base of my spine. Or perhaps, that is just the tension radiating from the people sitting closest to me. To an outsider, looking through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows that separate us from the common street traffic, this looks like a celebration. There are crystal flutes filled with amber champagne. There are arrangements of white lilies that smell faintly of funeral parlors. There are smiles plastered onto the faces of my parents. Richard and Lorna, smiles that stretch the skin around their eyes, but never quite manage to light up the pupils. I take a sip of water. It is ice cold, shocking my system, keeping me sharp. I need to be sharp. My father, Richard, adjusts his silk tie for the third time in 10 minutes. He is performing. That is the only word for it. Every time a waiter passes by to refill a glass or clear a bread plate, Richard expands his chest, booms out a laugh, or places a possessive hand on my shoulder. Playing the role of the benevolent patriarch, he is terrified that someone might look at this table and see the cracks running through the foundation. My mother, Lorna, is busy managing the optics. She shifts in her seat, angling her body away from me and toward my younger sister, Brielle. Brielle is 22, 2 years younger than me, and she is currently glowing under the ambient track lighting. She is wearing a sequin dress that costs more than my first car, and her hair is curled into perfect golden ringlets that bounce every time she laughs, and she is laughing a lot. She behaves as if this dinner explicitly scheduled to celebrate my graduation from university with honors is actually her personal debutante ball. The space in the city is just perfect, Brielle is saying, her voice pitched loud enough to carry to the neighboring tables. She waves a manicured hand, narrowly missing a wineglass. I told the realtor that a north-facing window is non-negotiable. An artist cannot work without proper light. You understand, right, Daddy? The gallery in New York is practically begging for my portfolio, so I need the Copperfield studio to be ready by next month. Richard nods vigorously, slicing into his steak with aggressive precision. Of course, Princess. Artistic integrity is everything. We cannot have you painting in the dark. I look down at my plate. I have barely touched my roasted chicken. The silence from my end of the table is a physical weight, a heavy blanket that nobody wants to acknowledge. I am the reason we are here, yet I feel like a ghost haunting my own party. My Aunt June, who is sitting 3 seats down, leans forward. She is the only person here who has looked me in the eye all evening. So Savannah, she says, her voice cutting through Brielle's monologue about color theory. Tell us again about the position at ArcLight Metrics. It is a data analyst role, correct? That is a massive achievement. They recruit less than 1% of applicants. I open my mouth to speak, to feel a momentary flicker of pride. But my mother is faster. Lorna laughs. A tinkling, dismissive sound that sounds like glass breaking. Oh, June. You know how dry that technical stuff is? Lorna says, waving her hand as if shooing away a fly. Savannah has always been good with numbers. Sure. It is very safe work. Stable. But let us be honest. Sitting in a cubicle staring at spreadsheets is hardly news. Is it now? Brielle is out there sacrificing for culture. She is putting her soul on the canvas. That is the real bravery. I shut my mouth. The words die in my throat. Unsaid. I look at my mother. She is not looking at me. She is beaming at Brielle. Her eyes shining with a vicarious hunger. For 24 years. I have been the steady one, the quiet one, the one who fixed things and solved problems, and earned scholarships so they would not have to spend a dime on my tuition. And for 24 years I have been invisible. Brielle preens under the praise. Thanks, Mom. It is hard. You know, people think art is just fun, but it is emotionally draining. I need so much support right now, and you will have it, Richard says firmly. The waiters arrive to clear the main course. The clatter of porcelain against metal fills the lull in conversation. I watch the busboys scrape the remnants of my father's steak into a bin. I feel a strange kinship with the scraps. Then the dessert menus arrive. But Richard does not pick his up. Instead, he reaches down to the leather briefcase resting against the leg of his chair. The sound of the zipper opening is sharp, like a zipper on a body bag. The conversation at the table dies instantly. Even Brielle stops talking about her imaginary gallery. Richard pulls out a folder. It is dark blue, thick, and ominous. He places it on the white tablecloth directly in front of me. It lands with a heavy, muted thud. The restaurant noise seems to fade into the background, becoming a distant hum. My heart rate slows down. I know this folder. I have never seen it before, but I know exactly what it represents. What is this? I ask. My voice is steady. I am proud of that. Richard clasps his hands on the table. He looks like a banker about to foreclose on a widow's home, but his voice is dripping with faux paternal concern. Just some small paperwork. Savannah, we thought tonight, with everyone together, would be the perfect time to settle the future. The future, I repeat. Your grandfather's estate. Lorna chimes in, her voice tight. She picks up her wine glass, but does not drink. Now that you have this fancy job at Arclight, you are set. You are stable. You have a salary, benefits, a 401k, you are fine. Richard taps the blue folder with his index finger. Brielle does not have that security. She is chasing a dream. It is a precarious path. As a family, we need to balance the scales. I reach out and flip open the cover of the folder. The paper inside is thick. Cream-colored bond paper, legal, official. My eyes scan the dense paragraphs of legalese. I see words like irrevocable transfer, beneficiary rights, and relinquishment of claim. There are sticky notes pasted on the bottom of the pages, bright yellow arrows pointing to the signature lines. They have already filled in my name. They have already notarized their portions. All that is missing is my consent. They want me to sign over my entire share of Grandfather Edward's inheritance. To Brielle, the stocks, the lake house, the control of his patents, everything. You want me to give it all to her. I say, it is not a question. We want you to do what is right, Richard corrects. His voice dropping an octave, becoming harder. Grandpa Edward was old. He did not understand the modern economy. He split things down the middle because he thought that was fair. But fairness is about need. Savannah, you do not need this money. Brielle does. Think of it as an investment in your sister. Lorna adds, her smile straining at the edges. You are the big sister. It is your duty to protect her. I look at Brielle. She is not looking at me. She is examining her cuticles. A small, smug smile playing on her lips. She knows. She knew this was coming. This was the real graduation gift, not for me, but from me. I look back at the document. It is formatted perfectly. It is a cage made of words. If I sign this, I am erasing the only thing my grandfather left specifically for me. I am erasing his trust in me. I close the folder. I do not push it back. I just close it. I look up, meeting my father's gaze. His eyes are dark, expecting obedience. He has spent my entire life training me to be the path of least resistance. He thinks I am water. He thinks I will flow wherever he digs the trench. I am not signing, I say. The silence that follows is absolute. It sucks the air out of the immediate vicinity. Brielle lets out a short, sharp laugh, expecting it to be a joke. When she sees my face, her laugh dies. Lorna makes a sound in her throat, a sharp click of her tongue against her teeth. Excuse me? Richard says. His voice is very quiet. I said, I am not signing, I repeat, articulating every syllable. Grandfather left that inheritance to me for a reason. I am not signing it over to Brielle so she can play artist in a studio she cannot afford. Richard's face turns a shade of red that clashes with the drapes. He leans forward, encroaching on my personal space. The mask of the loving father slips, revealing the bully underneath. You selfish, ungrateful child, he hisses. After everything we have done for you, we put clothes on your back. We kept a roof over your head. And this is how you repay us by hoarding wealth you did not earn while your sister struggles. I am not signing, I say for the third time. Richard stands up. His chair scrapes loudly against the parquet floor, a screech that turns heads at the nearby tables. He does not care anymore. The audience does not matter if the lead actor is losing control of the script. He reaches into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. I think for a second he's going to pull out a pen to force it into my hand, but he does not. He pulls out a long leather envelope, my diploma holder, the one I was handed on stage 4 hours ago, the tangible proof of 4 years of sleepless nights, double shifts at the library, and grueling exams. He pulls the parchment out of the leather sleeve. It is heavy, cream-colored, embossed with the gold seal of the university. My name, Savannah Hayes, is printed in elegant black calligraphy in the center. You think this piece of paper makes you special, Richard says, his voice shaking with rage. You think this makes you better than this family? He reaches into his pocket again and pulls out a lighter. It is an old silver flip-top lighter, one he has carried for 20 years. He flicks the wheel. A tall blue-orange flame springs to life, dancing in the conditioned air. Richard, sit down, Aunt June says, her voice trembling. He ignores her. He holds my diploma up high, like a priest offering a sacrifice. The restaurant is silent now. People are watching. Waiters are frozen in the aisles. If you really loved this family, Richard announces, his voice projecting to the back of the room, you would sign everything over to your sister. You would know your place. He lowers the corner of my diploma to the flame. It catches instantly. The dry, heavy paper is eager to burn. The fire licks up the side, curling the edges, turning the cream into black carbon. The gold seal blisters and bubbles. I sit perfectly still. I do not blink. I do not gasp. Lorna puts a hand over her mouth, but she does not stop him. Brielle watches with wide eyes, looking between the fire and me, waiting for me to break. They want me to scream. They want me to cry. They want me to beg him to stop, to promise them anything just to save this symbol of my achievement. The fire eats my name. Savannah turns to ash and floats down onto the pristine white tablecloth, leaving a streak of gray soot. Haze follows a second later. The heat radiates toward my face, but I feel colder than I have ever felt in my life. Richard holds onto the paper until the flames are dangerously close to his fingertips. Then he drops the burning remnants onto his bread plate. He stares at me, breathing hard, challenging me. He thinks he has won. He thinks he has stripped me of my pride, that he has broken my spirit by destroying the proof of my competence. He waits for the tears. Instead, I feel the corners of my lips twitching upward. I am smiling. It is a small, cold thing, but it is there. I look at the pile of ash smoldering on the china. I look at my father, whose face is twisted in a mixture of triumph and confusion. I look at my mother, who is already preparing her victim narrative. I look at Brielle, who looks disappointed that I am not sobbing. They think this was a negotiation. They think this was a power move. I stare straight into Richard's eyes and I whisper the words inside my own mind, loud and clear, ringing like a bell. You have no idea what you have just done. Most people assume that silence is a void, a lack of something. They think it signifies an absence of thought, or worse, an absence of spine. But sitting here, watching the last wisp of smoke curl up from the charred remains of my diploma, I am reminded of the one person who taught me that silence is actually a heavy, tangible thing. It is a container, and if you are patient enough, you can fill it with ammunition. My education in the art of invisibility did not begin tonight at the Gilded Oak. It began nearly 2 decades ago in the suburbs of Maple Harbor, in a house that was always perfectly swept, perfectly painted, and perfectly staged for an audience that never went home. I was 10 years old when I first understood that in the ecosystem of the Hayes family, there was only enough oxygen for one star. It was a Tuesday in mid-November. The gymnasium of Maple Harbor Elementary was smelling of floor wax and stale popcorn. It was the night of the district science fair. I had spent 3 months growing crystal structures in our basement, carefully monitoring temperature variables and humidity levels. I had a trifold board that I had leaded by hand, measuring the spacing between the headers with a ruler to ensure absolute symmetry. I stood next to my display for 2 hours, my hands clasped behind my back, explaining nucleation to judges who looked surprised that a 5th grader knew the word. When the principal announced my name as the first-place winner, the applause was polite. I walked up the wooden stairs of the stage, accepted the blue ribbon, and looked out into the sea of folding chairs. I was looking for my parents. I was looking for Richard's broad shoulders, or Lorna's meticulously coiffed hair. I scanned the first row, then the second, then the back, where the parents who came late usually stood. They were not there. Earlier that afternoon, Brielle had developed a sudden catastrophic case of stage fright regarding her ballet recital. The recital was just a practice run, held in a dance studio 3 towns over, but Brielle had wept theatrically. In the kitchen, claiming she could not possibly perform a plea without her mommy and daddy watching. So, they had gone. They had chosen the drama of her potential failure over the certainty of my success. I stood on that stage holding my ribbon, and I felt a strange sensation, like I was shrinking. It was not that I was disappearing. It was that I was being edited out of the frame. I was the background detail that did not require focus. After the ceremony, I stood outside the school by the flagpole, the wind biting through my thin sweater. Other kids were piling into minivans, high-fiving their fathers, holding their trophies up to the streetlights. I was alone. Then, a beat-up Ford truck pulled up to the curb. The engine rattled with a sound like loose change in a dryer. It was my grandfather, Edward Hart. He rolled down the passenger window. He did not ask where my parents were. He did not offer a pitying look or a sugary excuse about how busy they were. He just looked at the blue ribbon pinned to my chest, nodded once, and unlocked the door. "Get in," he said. "I know a place that serves milkshakes thick enough to hold a spoon upright." We went to a diner on the edge of town, a place with cracked vinyl seats, and a neon sign that buzzed like an angry hornet. We sat in a booth near the back. Grandfather Edward ordered me a cheeseburger and a chocolate shake. He watched me eat for a while, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the tabletop. "You are wondering why they are not here," he said. It was not a question. "Brielle had dance?" I mumbled, dipping a fry into ketchup. "She gets nervous." "Brielle gets attention," Edward corrected. His voice was gravelly, worn down by years of smoking and shouting over factory machinery. "There is a difference. Savannah, your sister is loud. She demands to be looked at. You are quiet. And people like Richard and Lorna, they mistake quiet for low maintenance. They think because you do not scream, you do not need anything." He leaned forward, his steel-gray eyes locking onto mine. "But let me tell you something, kiddo. The loud ones, they burn out. They need fuel constantly. The quiet ones are the ones who build things. You keep building. Let them have the stage. You own the foundation." That night, he drove me home and walked me to the door. Inside, the house was dark. My parents and Brielle had returned and gone to sleep, exhausted from the emotional labor of managing Brielle's anxiety. Nobody had left a light on for me. 4 years later, when I was 14, the pattern solidified into policy. I had been accepted into a prestigious summer program for young coders in San Francisco. It was expensive, but I had calculated the family budget based on the figures Richard carelessly left on his desk. I knew we could afford it. I had presented my case with a PowerPoint presentation in the living room, outlining how this camp would help my college applications. Lorna had smiled that tight, pained smile she wore whenever I asked for something that required effort. "Savannah, honey," she had said, smoothing the fabric of the sofa. "We are so proud of you, really, but we have to be realistic. Brielle has been scouted for that watercolor intensive in Italy. It is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for her." "But I got into the coding program," I argued. "I earned my spot. Brielle just signed up for a trip." "It is not just a trip," Richard snapped from his armchair. "It is her passion. Look, Savannah, you are smart. You can learn computers from a book in the library. You are always fine. You are self-sufficient. Brielle needs this push. She needs the structure. So because I am capable, I get less," I asked. "Because you are capable, you should understand sacrifice," my mother said, closing the discussion. They sent Brielle to Italy for 6 weeks. I spent that summer in the garage with grandfather Edward. While Brielle was sending home postcards of Venetian canals and complaining about the lack of ice in European sodas, I was learning how to strip wire and solder circuit boards. Edward's garage was a sanctuary of organized chaos. It smelled of ozone, cedar sawdust, and old coffee. Shelves were lined with parts from Hartfield Instruments, the company he had built from the ground up, and then stepped back from when his health began to decline. He never treated me like a child. He treated me like he handed me broken radios, non-functioning toasters, and fried motherboards, and told me to figure out why they had died. "Diagnose the problem," he would say, leaning over my shoulder as I prodded a circuit with a multimeter. "Do not guess. Look at the path of the current. Where does it stop? That is your answer." One rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky turns a bruised purple and the rain hammers against the aluminum garage door like handfuls of gravel. We were working on an old tube amplifier. The warm glow of the vacuum tubes was the only light in the room. Edward was in a contemplative mood. He had been coughing more lately, a dry hacking sound that he tried to hide with a handkerchief. "I built Hartfield Instruments to solve problems," he said suddenly, not looking at me. He was staring at the glowing tubes. "Precision, accuracy, truth, that is what machines give you. They do not lie. If a resistor is blown, it is blown. It does not try to convince you it is actually working perfectly while stealing power from the rest of the system." I looked up from my soldering iron. "Are we talking about resistors, Grandpa?" He chuckled. A wheezing sound. "We are always talking about resistors. Savannah, resistance is what stops the flow. Sometimes resistance is good. It protects the sensitive parts. But sometimes," he trailed off, his face darkening. He picked up a screwdriver and turned it over in his calloused hands. I have worked 40 years to build something of value, real value. Not the kind of value your father talks about at the country club, not the kind of value your mother tries to wear on her wrist. He looked at me then, and his expression was so intense it made me pause. I will not let it fall into the hands of people who only want it so they can brag about it on a Christmas card. I will not let them strip it for parts to fund a lifestyle they did not earn. Dad works hard, I said, repeating the line I had been fed since birth. Your father works hard at looking like he works hard, Edward said sharply. There is a difference. He wants the control, but he hates the responsibility. And your mother, she just wants everyone to envy her. That is a dangerous combination. Savannah. Hunger for status and fear of work. He reached out and tapped the side of my head with his knuckle. Some things have to be protected. Sometimes you have to protect things from your own family. And the only way to do that is to make sure you are the one holding the schematic. I do not understand, I said. You will, he promised. Just remember this, silence is not just about staying quiet. It is about listening when everyone else is too busy talking to hear the floorboards creaking under their feet. I bring myself back to the present, to the sterile air of the gilded oak. The memory fades. But the lesson remains sharp as a scalpel. I look around the table. Nothing has changed since I was 10. Nothing has changed since I was 14. Brielle is taking a selfie with her wine glass, angling her face to catch the light, oblivious to the charred pile of paper a foot away from her. She is still the star of the show, demanding that the universe rearrange itself to provide her with better lighting. Lorna is whispering furiously to Richard, likely strategizing how to spin this incident to the relatives. I can see her lips moving, forming words like stress and overworked and breakdown. She is already writing the script where I am the unstable daughter who ruined a lovely evening. And they are the saintly parents who just wanted to help. And Richard? My father is staring at me with a vein throbbing in his temple. He looks shocked. He genuinely cannot comprehend why his intimidation tactic did not result in immediate submission. He has spent 24 years treating me like a vending machine. He inputs the bare minimum of parenting, and I output good grades, obedience, and no drama. He kicked the machine, and instead of giving him what he wanted, the machine just swallowed his coin. I look at the empty space on the table where my diploma used to be. For years, I felt hurt by their neglect. I felt the sting of being the second choice, the backup plan, the invisible child. I spent nights crying into my pillow, wondering why I was not enough, why my achievements were invisible ink while Brielle's were neon signs. But sitting here now, I realized that Grandfather Edward was right. Their neglect was a gift because they were so busy looking at Brielle. They never looked at me because they were so busy curating their image. They never checked the foundation of the house they were living in because they dismissed me as the quiet one, the safe one, the one who would always be fine. They never bothered to learn what I was actually capable of. They never saw me watching. They never saw me learning. They never saw me gathering the data. I have spent my entire life in the margins of their story. And from the margins, you get a very clear view of the cracks in the spine. Richard clears his throat, breaking the standoff. Savannah, he says, his voice attempting to regain that command tone. We are a family. Families make sacrifices for each other. That is what the word means. I look at him. Really look at him. I see the fear behind his eyes. He is not asking for family. He is asking for a bailout. I hear the word family come out of his mouth. And it sounds hollow. It sounds like a blown resistor. It sounds like a lie that has been repeated so many times the speaker has forgotten the truth. And for the first time in my life, I do not feel the urge to fix it. I do not feel the urge to patch the circuit and keep the current flowing. I lean back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. I have the silence of the garage in my bones. I have the patience of a girl who waited hours for parents who never showed up. I know something they do not. The definition of family is about to change, and they are not going to like the new translation. The summer I turned 18, the air in Maple Harbor was thick enough to chew. It was a humid, suffocating August, the kind that sticks your shirt to your back the moment you step outside. My parents were busy orchestrating the logistics of Brielle's upcoming enrollment in a private arts high school, a venture that required an endless parade of tuition checks, portfolio reviews, and frantic discussions about which dance leotards were currently in vogue. I was preparing to leave for the state university on a partial scholarship, packing my life into cardboard boxes that I had scavenged from the back of a grocery store in the middle of this domestic chaos. Grandfather Edwards showed up at the front door. He did not come inside. He just leaned against the doorframe, looking past my mother's shoulder. As she argued on the phone with a registrar, and caught my eye, he tapped his wrist. A silent signal we had established years ago. Get your shoes, Savannah, he said. We have an appointment. I assumed we were going to the hardware store, or perhaps to the scrapyard to hunt for copper wire. Instead, we drove 40 minutes south to Harborview, a district that smelled of salt water and old money. We pulled up not to a warehouse but to a nondescript brick building with a modest brass plaque next to the door, Vega Associates, estate planning and elder law. The interior was cool and smelled of lemon polish and dust. There was no marble lobby, no intimidating receptionist with a headset, just a narrow hallway lined with filing cabinets that seemed to be holding up the ceiling. At the end of the hall, a woman stood up from behind a desk that was buried under mountains of paperwork. This was Corinne Vega. She was a woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob and glasses perched on the end of a nose that looked like it had been broken once, and set with determination. Her eyes were dark and assessed me with a terrifying speed, cataloging my posture, my cheap sneakers, and the nervous way I was twisting the strap of my bag. So this is the trustee, Corinne said. Her voice was like dry paper, crisp and professional. She did not smile, but her expression was not unkind. It was focused. This is Savannah, Edward corrected gently. Have a seat, kiddo. I sat in a leather chair that crunched under my weight. Grandpa, why are we here? Is something wrong? Are you sick? I am old, Edward said, waving a hand dismissively. Being old is a terminal condition, but we are not here to talk about my health. We are here to talk about what happens when my health runs out. Corinne opened a thick file folder. The sound of the heavy paper turning was loud in the small room. She slid a document across the mahogany desk toward me. The header read, The Edward Hart Revocable Living Trust. I am not writing a traditional will, Savannah, Edward said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial rumble. Wills are public record. Wills are messy. Wills are an invitation for every vulture in the family to pick the bones clean and probate court. I am putting everything the company shares, the patents, the lake house, the investment accounts into a trust. I stared at the document. I had taken an introductory economics class in high school, so I knew the vocabulary, but seeing it applied to my own family felt surreal. Okay, I said slowly. So you are protecting the assets. That makes sense. It is more than protection, Corinne said. She pulled a pen from behind her ear and pointed to a paragraph on the third page. A trust needs a trustee, someone to manage the assets, someone to decide when and how the money is distributed to the beneficiaries. Your father expects to be that person, Edward said. He thinks it is his birthright. He thinks the moment I am gone, he gets the keys to the kingdom so he can liquidate heartfelt instruments and fund your mother's social climbing and your sister's hobbies. He will be furious if he is not, I whispered. The thought of Richard's rage made my stomach turn over. Grandpa, you cannot do this. If you cut him out of control, he will burn the house down. He will take it out on me. Edward leaned forward. The fluorescent light reflected in his eyes, making them look hard and bright. He will not be able to take it out on you, Savannah, because you will be the one holding the steering wheel. I froze. What? I am naming you as the sole successor trustee, Edward stated. He said it calmly, as if he were asking me to pass the salt. Upon my death or incapacitation, you take full legal control of the entire estate, not your father, not your mother, you. I pushed the paper away, shaking my head. Panic rose in my throat, tasting like bile. No, I cannot do that. I am 18. They are my parents. They will destroy me. Grandpa, you do not know what it is like living with them when they do not get what they want. They will guilt me. They will scream at me. They will make my life a living hell until I sign it over to them. The room went silent. Corinne watched me, her pen hovering over her notepad. Edward reached across the desk and covered my hand with his. His skin was dry and cool. His grip surprisingly strong. Savannah, look at me. I looked up, blinking back tears of sheer terror. You are worried about them being angry, he said softly. You are worried about preserving the peace. But let me ask you a question, and I want you to answer it honestly. When have they ever cared if you were okay? When have they ever sacrificed one single comfort to make sure you were safe? I opened my mouth to defend them, to find one example, one moment of pure parental sacrifice. I thought of the science fair. I thought of the camp money diverted to Brielle. I thought of the empty seat at my high school graduation where my father should have been. But he was golfing with a client. They are my family, I said weakly. Family is not a blood type, Edward said. It is behavior. And their behavior tells me that if I leave this money to them, they will waste it, and in 10 years, they will be broke and coming to you for a loan. I am doing this to save the legacy. Yes, but mostly, I am doing this to give you a shield. Corinne cleared her throat. This brings us to the contingency clauses. This is the part that makes this trust unique. She flipped to page 12. The text was dense, but she summarized it with the precision of a surgeon. We have inserted a specific provision regarding the conduct of the beneficiaries. Corinne explained. We call it a no coercion clause. It is aggressive, but given your grandfather's description of your family dynamics, we believe it is necessary. Read it, Edward commanded. Corinne adjusted her glasses and read aloud from the document. Should any beneficiary attempt to coerce, intimidate, harass, or apply undue duress upon the trustee for the purpose of altering the distribution of assets, forcing a resignation of the trustee, or compelling the transfer of assets outside the stipulations of this trust, said beneficiary shall immediately forfeit their entire interest in the trust estate. She looked up at me. Do you understand what that means? Savannah. I shook my head, trying to process the legalese. It means if they bully me, it means, Edward said, a grim smile touching his lips, that if they try to force you to sign anything, if they corner you, threaten you, or try to guilt trip you into giving up your control, they lose everything, not just control, but the money too. Their share goes to zero. The logic is simple, Corinne added. The trust assumes that if a beneficiary is attacking the trustee, they are acting against the interests of the trust. Therefore, they remove themselves from the pool of beneficiaries. It is a self-cleaning mechanism. But, how do we prove it? I asked. They are smart. They will do it in private. They will do it behind closed doors. Then you document it, Corinne said. You keep the emails. You keep the voicemails. And if they ever put a piece of paper in front of you and demand a signature, you refuse. If they push, they trigger the trap. I sat back in the chair. The magnitude of what they were handing me was heavy, like a loaded weapon. It was terrifying. But for the first time I felt a strange sense of power. My silence, my ability to observe, my capacity to endure their neglect. Grandpa was turning all of it into armor. Why me? I asked quietly. Why not just hire a professional trustee, a bank? Because a bank does not know them, Edward said. A bank would just cut checks until the money ran out. You know who they are. You know what they are capable of. And more importantly, Savannah, you know the value of $1 because you have had to work for every single one you have ever had. He leaned back, looking tired, but satisfied. Someday, they will test you. They will come for you, not because they need the money, though they will say they do, but because they need control. They cannot stand the idea that the quiet girl in the corner holds the keys. Do not give them the keys. Do not give them the satisfaction. We spent another hour going over the details. Corinne explained the duties of an executor, the difference between income and principal, and the fiduciary responsibilities I would carry. I listened, absorbing every word, filing it away in the same part of my brain where I stored complex code and statistical models. When we finally left the office, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky over the harbor in bruises of purple and orange. We got back into Edward's truck. He did not start the engine immediately. He sat there, staring out at the ocean through the dirty windshield. Promise me something, he said. He did not look at me. Anything? I said. If that day comes, he said, his voice raspy. If I am gone and they corner you, if they use guilt or anger or that fake love they turn on like a faucet, do not argue with them. Do not try to explain the trust. Do not try to make them understand logic. They are immune to it. He turned the key in the ignition and the engine coughed to life. Just let them dig their own hole. Let the truth speak for itself. You just stand your ground. I promise, I said. I will not sign. No matter what. Edward nodded. He reached into his flannel shirt pocket and pulled out a pack of gum, offering me a stick. It was his way of saying the serious business was done, but on the drive back to Maple Harbor, I watched his hands on the steering wheel. They were trembling slightly. It was a tremor I had walked into the kitchen late at night to get a glass of water. The light in the study was on. I peeked through the crack in the door. Edward was sitting at my father's desk. The only light came from the brass banker's lamp, casting a pool of yellow illumination on the green blotter. He was hunched over a stack of papers, the final versions of the documents we had seen in Corinne's office. He was coughing, a deep, wet sound that rattled his chest. He took a handkerchief, wiped his mouth, and then picked up his pen. His hand shook as he hovered over the signature line, but then he steadied it. He pressed down hard, signing his name with a flourish that looked like defiance and ink. He was not just signing a legal document. He was closing the blast doors. He was setting a trap that would sit dormant for years, waiting for the exact moment my parents' greed outweighed their caution. I watched him from the hallway, standing in the dark, and I realized that he was not doing this because he hated them. He was doing this because he knew them. He was protecting the family from itself, and as I stood there, invisible in the shadows, I understood that my grandfather was the only person in the world who saw me not as a piece of furniture, but as the only structural beam strong enough to hold up the roof. I went back to my room without making a sound. I never told him I saw him that night. I never told him that the image of him signing those papers under the yellow lamp would burn itself into my memory. A beacon I would look for years later, when the fire of a lighter was burning my name to ash. The next 4 years were a blur of caffeine, fluorescent lights, and the blue glow of dual monitors. While my family back in Maple Harbor was constructing a fantasy life, I was building a real one, brick by brick, in the library of the State University. My major was data science with a minor in economics. It was dry, unglamorous work. It consisted of long nights debugging Python scripts and running regression models until my eyes burned. I worked 20 hours a week as a lab assistant for a professor who was researching machine learning algorithms. It paid just enough to cover my rent in a drafty off-campus apartment that smelled perpetually of ramen noodles and damp drywall. I applied for every grant, every scholarship, and every work-study program available. I did not ask Richard or Lorna for a dime. I did not have to. I had calculated my budget down to the cent. However, if you listen to my parents speak at family gatherings, you would think they were bankrolling a royal expedition. "We are just sacrificing so much to put Savannah through that program," I heard Richard say to a cousin at Thanksgiving during my sophomore year. He was swirling a glass of expensive scotch that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "It is a heavy load, but, education is paramount. We want her to focus on her studies, not money." I stood in the hallway holding a tray of appetizers and said nothing. I had just transferred $200 from my savings to pay for my own textbooks because Richard had forgotten to send the $50 he had promised for my birthday. While I was learning the architecture of databases, Brielle was learning the architecture of spending other people's money. She did not go to college. She went on a journey of artistic discovery. This involved a 6-month photography course in sunny San Diego, followed by a watercolor retreat in the south of France because she felt her muse was stifled in California. From Lorna Hayes, subject Brielle's Europe trip date, October 14th, Savannah, honey. Just wanted to let you know, we might be a little tight on the Christmas budget this year. We had to wire Brielle an extra $3,000 for accommodation in Provence. The villa she found is just perfect for her light, and you know how sensitive she is to her environment. Since you have that little job at the university, I am sure you can manage your own train ticket home. Right? You are so independent. We are so proud of how you do not need us. I read that email in the computer lab at 2 in the morning. You do not need us. It was not a compliment. It was an excuse. They had categorized me as a low-maintenance appliance that runs forever without servicing, allowing them to funnel all their resources into the high-maintenance luxury vehicle that was my sister. Then came the winter of my junior year. The call came at 4 in the morning. Grandfather Edward had passed away in his sleep. The funeral was efficient. That is the kindest word I can use. Richard organized a service that was less about honoring Edward's life, and more about getting it over with. There were lilies, a short eulogy where Richard spoke mostly about his own childhood, a reception where the coffee was lukewarm. I stood by the grave, feeling a hollowness in my chest that had nothing to do with the cold wind. I had lost the only person who spoke my language, but I did not cry. Edward hated public displays of emotion. "Grief is private," he used to say. "Don't perform it for people who didn't know the deceased." So I stood straight, hands clasped, and watched my family. They were sad, I suppose. But beneath the sadness, there was a buzzing energy. It was the frantic, hungry energy of people who are waiting for a will reading. The week after the funeral, I was back at the house helping to sort through some of Edward's old clothes. I was in the hallway, folding a stack of flannel shirts when I heard voices drifting from the kitchen. "It is a simple probate process, Lorna," Richard was saying. His voice was relaxed, confident. I spoke to the guys at the club. "Since I am the only son, and he was a widower, it naturally flows to us. The lake house alone is worth $2 million in this market. We could sell it, pay off the mortgage here, and finally get that studio built for Brielle properly." "And the company?" Lorna asked. "Hartfield Instruments runs itself," Richard scoffed. "I will step in as chairman. Obviously, we can probably trim the R&D budget. Edward was always wasting money on innovation. We can squeeze a lot more profit out of it if we streamline." I froze, clutching a plaid shirt to my chest. They were already carving up the carcass. They had no idea that the meat was already gone. I waited for them to mention me. I waited for one sentence like, "We should see if Savannah wants anything of Grandpa's." It never came. 2 days later, I was back at university when a notification popped up on my phone. From Corinne Vega, subject to state, update date, February 12th. Dear Ms. Hayes, I am writing to confirm that the trust protocols have been activated upon the passing of Mr. Hart. As discussed, all major assets including Hartfield Instruments and the real estate portfolio have been successfully titled into the trust. You are now the acting trustee. Currently, no action is required from you. The family has not yet formally requested access to the funds. As they are under the impression that standard probate is pending, I will handle the initial inquiries. Remember your promise. Silence is your shield. Regards. Corinne? I stared at the screen. It was real. I owned it all. The lake house they were planning to sell mine. The company Richard wanted to gut mine. I closed the laptop and went to class. I felt like I was carrying a grenade in my backpack, but the pin was still securely in place. As graduation approached, the pressure began to mount. It was subtle at first, masked as parental advice. Message from Lorna. Heard you got an interview with ArcLight Metrics? That's great, sweetie. Technology is such a safe field. You're so lucky to have a brain for boring stuff like that. Brielle is struggling so much with her gallery contacts. The art world is so cruel. It must be nice to have it so easy. Message from Richard. When you get this job, we need to talk about your contributions. Now that you'll be making real money, it's time you learned about supporting the family ecosystem. They were setting the stage. They were building a narrative where my success was a result of luck and boring stability, while Brielle's floundering was a tragic result of her genius being misunderstood. Therefore, the logic went, I owed her. The breaking point, or rather, the moment of absolute clarity came 1 month before graduation. I drove home for a weekend to pick up some winter clothes I had left in storage. The house was empty when I arrived. Lorna was at a spa day. Richard was golfing. Brielle was presumably networking at a brunch. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water. Lying on the center island, right next to the fruit bowl, was a yellow legal pad. It was covered in Richard's sprawling, aggressive handwriting. It was a draft, a plan for the division of assets. I knew I shouldn't look, but I did. I leaned over the counter, my heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Draft 4, estate allocation, lake house. Transfer to Brielle needs quiet for studio residence, Hartfield chairs, Richard control income, cash reserves. 80% to renovation fund, Brielle's launch, 20% to general savings, Savannah. She has ArcLight job plus benefits. Does not need capital. Maybe grandma's jewelry. I stared at the question mark next to my name. It wasn't even a 0. It was a question mark. As if my inheritance was a problem to be solved, a variable that needed to be eliminated to make the equation work for everyone else. Maybe grandma's jewelry. I felt a cold laugh bubbling up in my throat. Grandma's jewelry had been sold 10 years ago to pay for a country club membership. They didn't even remember. I took my phone out. My hand was shaking, not from fear but from a sudden icy rage. I snapped a picture of the notepad. Then I took a picture of the date on the wall calendar to prove when I had seen it. I went upstairs to my old room. It was already being colonized. Brielle had stored stacks of canvases in the corner. My bookshelf had been cleared off to make room for her drying racks. I sat on the edge of my bed and opened my laptop. I created a new folder on my encrypted drive. I named it Evidence. I uploaded the photos of the notepad. Then I went back through 4 years of emails. I saved the email where Lorna refused to help with my textbooks. I saved the email where Richard lied about paying my tuition. I saved the email where they asked me to co-sign a loan for Brielle's car, which I had refused. I was not building a case for court. Not yet. I was building a case for my own conscience. I knew that when the explosion finally happened, they would try to gaslight me. They would tell me I was crazy, that I was imagining their favoritism, that they loved us exactly the same. I needed the data. Data does not lie. Data does not forget. Just as I was about to close the laptop, my phone pinged. A text from Brielle. Message from Brielle. Hey sis. Mom said you're coming home for grad dinner next month. Can't wait, BTI. When Grandpa's house is finally ours. I'm turning your old room there into my painting loft. The light is better in that corner. You don't mind, right? You're never there anyway. I stared at the winking kissy face emoji. She had already moved in. In her mind, the deed was done. The ink was dry. She was measuring the drapes for a house she did not own. Paid for by a grandfather she had barely visited. Stealing a room from a sister she barely acknowledged. I looked around my childhood bedroom. At the encroaching canvases. At the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. I thought about the no coercion clause resting in a safe and harbor view. I typed back. We can talk about it at dinner. I sent the text. Then I took a screenshot of her message and dragged it into the evidence folder. I sat there in the silence, listening to the hum of a train track when the locomotive is still miles away but coming fast. They were so sure of themselves. They were speeding toward a cliff, laughing and drinking champagne, completely unaware that the bridge was out and I was the only one with the map. I closed my laptop with a snap. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the empty house. It was time to get ready for graduation. The week leading up to graduation felt less like a celebration, and more like the stillness before a hurricane makes landfall. The air pressure in my life was dropping rapidly, and the sky was turning. That bruised greenish-gray color that warns you to board up the windows. It started with a phone call from Richard on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the break room at Arclight Metrics staring at the coffee machine as it dripped dark liquid into a carafe when my phone buzzed against the laminate counter. Savannah. My father's voice boomed down the line. He did not say hello. He sounded jovial the way he always did when he was trying to sell something to a client. I was just at the club with Bob Miller. You know Bob. His son works in finance in San Francisco. We were talking about the market for data analysts. Hello, Dad. I said, taking my cup. Bob's son must be doing well. Oh, he is killing it, Richard said. But I told him my Savannah is going to outpace him in a year. Listen, I was looking over the offer letter you mentioned last month. Did you say the starting base was $85,000? I paused. I had never given him the exact number. I had said it was competitive. He had been digging. It is around there, I said cautiously, and the stock options he pressed. They vest over 4 years, right, but the initial grant is significant, plus the signing bonus and the full medical coverage. That is a package worth what, $120,000 a year effectively. Maybe more. I am very lucky to have found a good position. I said, keeping my voice neutral. It is not luck. It is stability, Richard corrected. That is what I told your mother. I said Savannah is set. She is locked in. She does not have to worry about rent or bills or where her next meal is coming from. She has achieved escape velocity. He paused, and I could hear the ice clinking in his glass on the other end. Unlike your sister, he added, his voice dropping to a somber, worried register. Brielle, she is struggling. Savannah, the art world is brutal. She does not have a corporate ladder to climb. She is out there in the wilderness without a map. She has a map. Dad, I said, leaning against the counter. She has the map you and Mom drew for her. We are just trying to level the playing field, he said quickly. You understand that, right? Economics is your thing. Allocation of resources based on need. You have the surplus. She has the deficit. It is just math. Right, I said, just math. I hung up the phone with a cold knot in my stomach. He was not calling to congratulate me. He was conducting an audit. He was tallying up my assets to justify stripping me of my inheritance. He needed to believe that I was so wealthy, so secure, that cutting me out of Grandfather Edward's trust was not theft. It was charity. 2 days later, the assault shifted from financial to emotional. I opened my inbox to find an email from Lorna. The subject line was planning for the future. There was no greeting. It was a stream of consciousness that read like a ransom note written by a socialite. Savannah. I am looking at the invoices for Brielle's website launch and the retainer for the PR firm in New York. You have no idea how expensive it is to build a brand from scratch. People judge you by your image. If she does not launch big, she fails. We cannot let her fail. I know you have always been the independent one. You get that from me. But independence comes with a price. Sometimes being strong means you have to step back and let the weaker ones have the support. Grandfather Edward always said he wanted this family to be taken care of. He didn't mean just one person. He meant the legacy. We need to make sure everyone is on the same page at dinner. Please do not make this difficult, Mom. I read the email twice. She is the legacy. I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples. They were rewriting history in real time. They were turning Grandfather Edward, a man who wore flannel shirts and fixed his own toaster, into a patron of the high arts who would have wanted his money spent on gallery openings and PR retainers. It was insulting, but it was also terrifyingly coordinated. They were closing ranks. Then a different notification popped up. A stark contrast to the emotional debris Lorna had just dumped in my inbox from Corin Vega. Subject: trust review. Post-graduation. Ms. Hayes. I am confirming our appointment for next week to finalize the activation of the operational provisions of the trust. I have the documents ready for your review as the sole trustee. I suspect the pressure is mounting. Remember what Edward told you when they corner you? Do not argue. Do not try to win the debate. Just remember, there is a bigger document than whatever piece of paper they put in front of you. You have the trump card. You do not need to play it until the game is over. Stay the course. CV. I exhaled a breath I did not know I had been holding. The bigger document. I thought about the binders sitting in the safe in Corinne's office. I thought about the video file on the encrypted drive. My parents were playing checkers. They were moving pieces around the board, thinking they were clever, thinking they were trapping me. They had no idea that grandfather Edward had already bought the board, the pieces, and the table they were playing on. On Friday, the day before the ceremony, the atmosphere at my office was festive. There was a sheet cake in the break room for the three of us who were graduating from our respective master's programs. We are going to O'Malley's after work. Sarah, a junior analyst, told me she was beaming, holding a plastic fork. Happy hour prices, terrible karaoke. It is going to be great. You have to come. Savannah, you need to blow off some steam. I looked at her. She looked so normal. Her parents were coming into town and they were going to buy her dinner and tell her they were proud of her. There would be no contracts to sign. There would be no negotiations. I can't, I said. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. I have a family dinner. My parents planned something special at the Gilded Oak. Oh, fancy. Sarah laughed. That sounds amazing. Enjoy the champagne. Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. Enjoy. I walked back to my desk and sat down. A family dinner. It sounded so benign, but I knew better. It wasn't a dinner. It was an ambush. I felt like a soldier polishing her boots before walking into a minefield. I unlocked my phone and opened Instagram. It was a mistake, but I couldn't help myself. I needed to know the enemy's position. Brielle's story was at the top of my feed. The first clip was her spinning in a dressing room, wearing a shimmering silver cocktail dress. Caption: graduation fit check. The next clip was a close-up of her makeup, done by a professional artist. Caption: glam squad coming through. The third clip was a photo of a floor plan. It was a blueprint for a loft space in downtown Copperfield. She had drawn hearts over the corner office. Caption: Big Sis is finally graduating tomorrow, which means the real future starts now. Can't wait to sign the lease on this beauty next week. Studio loading new chapter. Blessed. I stared at the hashtag studio loading. She wasn't just hoping for the money. She had already spent it. She had already told her friends, her followers, and her realtors that the funding was secured. The level of entitlement was breathtaking. It wasn't just that they wanted the money. It was that they couldn't conceive of a reality where they didn't get it. They saw me as a vending machine. I was just the mechanism that had to be pressed to release the prize. I went home to my small apartment. It was quiet. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my bedroom. I was wearing the dress I planned to wear to the dinner. A simple navy blue sheath dress, professional, understated, armor. I looked at my reflection. I looked tired. There were dark circles under my eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide. I am not signing, I said to the mirror. My voice sounded thin, weak. I cleared my throat. I stood up straighter. I channeled Corinne Vega's dry legal tone. I channeled grandfather Edward's stubborn gravel. I am not signing better. I will not sign that. No, absolutely not. I practiced the variations for 20 minutes. I watched my own face. I watched for the flinch. I watched for the hesitation. And then suddenly, I stopped. I realized I didn't need to practice. This wasn't a line I had to memorize. This wasn't a performance. Refusing to sign wasn't something I had to do. It was who I was. For 24 years, I had been the one who didn't sign. I didn't sign up for their drama. I didn't sign up for their validation. I didn't sign up for their version of reality. I had already refused them 1,000 times in 1,000 small ways. This was just the final formal rejection. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I wasn't going to that dinner to argue. I was going to witness. I was going to let them verify the hypothesis that grandfather Edward and I had formed 4 years ago. I checked the time. It was 6 o'clock. The reservation was at 7. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop one last time. I pulled up the email thread with Corinne. I typed quickly, my fingers flying over the keys. To Corinne Vega, subject tonight, I am heading to the restaurant now. The pressure has been building all week. They have hinted at the papers. They have hinted at the sacrifice I need to make. If they bring anything for me to sign tonight, I will not. I am prepared for them to make a scene. Just letting you know in advance so you can have the file ready for Monday. Savannah, I hit send. I stood up and grabbed my purse. My hand hovered over the doorknob. My phone buzzed. Corinne replied instantly. From Corinne Vega, subject, tonight. Good. Just be yourself. Let them do the talking. And remember, silence can be evidence. 2. I stared at that sentence. Silence can be evidence. They were going to fill the silence with noise, with threats, with guilt, and every word they said was going to be another nail in the coffin of their own inheritance. I turned off the lights in my apartment. I walked out into the cool evening air. I got into my car and drove toward the center of town, toward the lights of the Gilded Oak, toward the fire that was waiting for me. I was ready to burn, or rather, I was ready to watch them burn themselves. The waiter had just cleared the main course, leaving behind the heavy savory scent of truffle oil and red wine reduction that hung over the table like a fog. The ambient jazz music, which had been a polite saxophone murmur all evening, seemed to fade into a dull buzz, drowned out by the thrumming tension in my own ears. I looked at the blue folder sitting on the white tablecloth. It was heavy, textured cardstock, the kind used for high-end corporate presentations. It sat there between the crystal salt shaker and the centerpiece of white lilies, looking less like a legal document and more like a weapon that had just been unsheathed. Richard placed his hand flat on the table, his manicured nails clicking against the wood. He leaned forward, adopting the posture of a benevolent CEO addressing a difficult shareholder meeting. Savannah, he began, his voice smooth, pitched perfectly to be heard by our relatives, at the far end of the table without alerting the neighboring diners. We need to be practical. We have supported you for 24 years. We carried you through your education. We provided the safety net that allowed you to take risks, to focus on your grades, to get this job at ArcLight. I watched his lips move. It was fascinating, in a clinical sort of way. To watch him construct a reality that did not exist. He was claiming credit for the scholarships I won, for the 3 jobs I worked, for the rent checks I wrote myself. He was rewriting the history of my neglect and calling it support. And now, he continued, gesturing vaguely toward Brielle, it is time for you to do the right thing, to balance the ledger. You are established. You have a career path that is essentially a paved road to wealth. Your sister is an artist. Her path is rocky. It requires capital. Brielle perked up at the mention of her struggle. She took a sip of champagne, leaving a peach-colored lipstick stain on the rim. Exactly, she said. Her voice a little too loud, a little too brittle. I actually already put a deposit down on the studio and west side. The realtor said, if I do not close by the 1st of the month, I lose the space. I told him it was fine because the family details were being sorted out tonight. I looked at her. You put a deposit down? I asked. With what money? With a credit card Daddy gave me, she said, rolling her eyes as if I were simple. But the down payment is due next week. And obviously, I cannot pay that with a credit card. It needs to come from the trust. Grandpa promised me that space. Well, he didn't say the specific address, but he always said he wanted me to have a place to create. He wanted you to create, I said softly. He never said he wanted to buy you a loft in the most expensive district in the city. Lorna set her wine glass down with a sharp clink. She smoothed the front of her dress, a nervous tic she had whenever the conversation veered away from her control. Oh, stop it. Savannah, do not be petty. You have never cared about the lake house. You hate the outdoors. And let us be honest, you do not exactly have the presence to manage the Hartfield estate. That company needs a face. It needs style. You are very good in the background, sweetie. But Brielle shines. She can represent this family in a way you just cannot. The insult was delivered with a smile wrapped in a compliment about my background skills. It was a masterclass in maternal cruelty. I reached out and opened the folder again. I ignored the sticky notes with the sign here arrows. I looked at the header of the document, drafted by Sterling, Pruitt and Associates. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. This was not Corinne Vega's letterhead. This was not the firm grandfather Edward had used for 40 years. They had gone to a new lawyer. They had drafted a completely new transfer agreement, likely telling this new firm that I was fully on board and that this was just a formality to consolidate assets. They were trying to bypass the trust's internal structure by getting me to voluntarily abdicate my position before I even officially assumed it. If I signed this, I would not just be giving them the money. I would be validating their narrative. I would be agreeing that I was incompetent, that I was secondary, and that my grandfather's wishes were irrelevant. I looked up. Richard was watching me with expectant eyes, a pen already halfway out of his pocket. Lorna was checking her reflection in a spoon. Brielle was texting under the table. They were so sure. They were so absolutely certain that I would fold. I closed the folder. The sound was soft, a mere whisper of air, but it felt like a gavel coming down. I placed my hand on top of the blue cover and pushed it gently back across the tablecloth toward my father. I am not signing, I said. The chatter at the far end of the table stopped. Aunt June froze with a forkful of cake halfway to her mouth. Richard stared at the folder as if it were a grenade I had just tossed back at him. Excuse me? I am not signing, I repeated, my voice steady, stripped of all emotion. Not tonight, not next week, not ever. Savannah, Lorna hissed, her smile vanishing. Do not make a scene. We have guests. I am not the one making a scene, I said. I am simply declining a business proposal. This document was drafted by a firm I do not know, attempting to transfer assets that are governed by a trust you have not read. To a beneficiary who has already spent money she does not have, the answer is no. Richard's face flushed a deep, ugly crimson. The vein in his forehead began to pulse. He was not used to being told no. He was certainly not used to being told no by the daughter he had spent 2 decades ignoring. You listen to me, he growled, leaning in so close I could smell the scotch on his breath. You think you are so smart with your degree and your little job? You are nothing without this family. You are ungrateful. We fed you. We clothed you. And now you want to steal your sister's future because you are jealous. I am not jealous, I said. I am responsible. Grandpa named me trustee because he knew I would not let you liquidate his life's work to buy status. He was senile, Richard shouted. He did not care about the other diners anymore. He was an old man who was manipulated by a bitter child. You poisoned him against us. Richard, Aunt June called out, looking terrified, but Richard was past the point of return. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He needed to hurt me. He needed to take something from me to balance the humiliation I had just dealt him. He reached for the leather envelope on the table. My diploma. You think this makes you special? He spat, grabbing the heavy parchment I had been so proud to hold just hours ago. You think this piece of paper gives you the right to look down on us? He pulled the lighter from his pocket. The metallic clink of the lid opening was sharp and clear in the sudden silence of the restaurant. If you do not respect this family, he announced, his voice booming, then you do not deserve anything this family paid for. He flicked the wheel. The flame jumped up, blue at the base, orange at the tip. He held the corner of my diploma to the fire. I watched, mesmerized. The paper did not catch immediately. It was high-quality, dense archival stock. It resisted for a second, browning and blistering before a bright yellow flame finally took hold. Smoke curled up, accurate and dark. It smelled of burning cotton and ink. Sign the papers. Savannah, Lorna cried out, though she did not move to stop him. Just sign them, and he will stop. Sign it, Richard yelled, waving the burning document like a torch. Show us you are a haze. I sat perfectly still. I watched the fire eat the gold seal of the university. I watched the calligraphy of my name turn into black, flaky ash. And in that moment, I felt nothing. I expected to feel grief. I expected to feel violated. But as I watched the ash drift down onto the pristine white tablecloth, staining it like dirty snow, I realized the truth. That diploma was just paper. My education was in my brain. My resilience was in my spine. My future was in my hands. He could burn the receipt, but he could not return the merchandise. But more importantly, I realized what he was doing legally. He was coercing me. He was using intimidation, destruction of property, and public humiliation to force me to alter the distribution of the trust assets. He was performing a live demonstration of exactly why Grandfather Edward had inserted the no coercion clause. And he was doing it in front of 20 witnesses, and I noticed with a quick glance at the ceiling. A security camera mounted in the corner. He held the paper until the heat must have scorched his fingers. Then he dropped the flaming ruin onto his bread plate. It smoldered there, a heap of black carbon, the last few sparks dying out. Richard stood there, panting, his chest heaving. He looked at me, waiting for the breakdown. He wanted tears. He wanted me to fall to my knees and beg for forgiveness. He wanted to see the little girl who used to wait by the window for him to come home. That little girl was gone. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my navy dress. I picked up my purse. I looked at the pile of ash. Then I looked at Brielle, whose mouth was hanging open. I looked at Lorna, who was pale and trembling. Finally, I looked at Richard. You just proved Grandpa right, I said. My voice was not loud, but in the dead silence of the room, it carried like a bell. Richard blinked. Confused. What? You think you just destroyed me? I said calmly. But you didn't. You just destroyed yourself. I did not explain. I did not mention the clause. I did not mention Corinne Vega or the video files or the trap that had just snapped shut around their ankles. I simply turned around. Savannah, Richard barked. Sit down. We are not finished. I kept walking. Walk out that door and you are dead to us. He screamed after me. I walked past the stunned hostess. I walked past the table of tourists who were staring with wide eyes. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the Gilded Oak and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The night air was cool and smelled of the ocean. The streetlights were humming. The world outside was indifferent to the drama inside. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with clean air. My hands were not shaking. My heart was beating a steady rhythmic cadence. I did not look back at the restaurant. I did not look back at the family I was leaving behind in the smoke. I walked toward my car, pulled my phone from my purse, and dialed a number I had memorized 4 years ago. Hello? Corinne Vega's voice answered on the second ring. It is done, I said. They lit the match. Are you safe? She asked immediately. I am fine, I said. And for the first time in my life, I truly meant it. I am finally free. I unlocked my car door, got in, and drove away, leaving the ashes of my old life on a dinner plate, waiting for the check to arrive. I woke up to the smell of cinnamon and roasting coffee beans. For a disorienting moment, I did not know where I was. The ceiling above me was textured plaster, not the smooth, sterile drywall of my apartment, and the light filtering through the window was soft and filtered through yellow curtains, not the harsh gray morning light of the city. Then I shifted, and the stiffness in my neck reminded me. I was on the floral sofa in my Aunt June's living room in Northbridge. I had driven here last night, shaking and exhausted, after fleeing the Gilded Oak. June had opened her door, taken one look at my face, and simply pulled me inside. She had not asked for details. She had just given me a blanket and a pillow. I sat up, pulling the quilt around my shoulders. The terror of the previous night had evaporated, replaced by a dull, aching clarity. I felt like a survivor walking through the wreckage of a house fire the morning after, assessing what was lost, and realizing that everything important was actually safe in my pocket. My phone was sitting on the coffee table where I had left it. It was vibrating. It had been vibrating, I suspected, for hours. The screen lit up every few seconds with a new notification, a relentless strobe light of family drama. I reached for it. My hand did not shake. I felt a strange detachment, like I was an anthropologist studying the behavior of a primitive and aggressive tribe. I unlocked the screen. The sheer volume of communication was staggering. There were 14 missed calls from my mother, 6 from my father, and a barrage of text messages that had accumulated like digital silt. I opened the thread with Brielle first. From Brielle. Sent 8:42 a.m. Thanks for ruining last night. Seriously, I had to spend 2 hours calming Mom down in the bathroom. Dad says you will fix this once you calm down and stop being dramatic. I already told my landlord I'm getting the studio, so do not make this harder than it has to be. Just sign the stupid papers so I can get my keys. I stared at the words. There was no question about my well-being. No apology for watching our father burn my property. There was only annoyance that I had disrupted her schedule. To Brielle, my rebellion was not a moral stand. It was a logistical inconvenience, like a traffic jam or a slow waiter. She lived in a world so thoroughly cushioned by our parents that she genuinely believed my refusal was a temporary glitch, a software error that would be patched out by morning. I swiped away from her message and opened my email. There was a message from Richard sent at 3 in the morning. The subject line was simply reality check. Savannah. I am writing this because I am too angry to speak to you on the phone. Your behavior tonight was appalling. You humiliated us in front of the entire town, but more importantly, you showed a complete lack of understanding regarding how this family operates. I have been up all night tallying the costs we have incurred for you over the last 2 decades. The private tutors, the orthodontics, the laptop for college, the car insurance we covered until you were 22. We have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into your success. We did that because we thought we were raising a team player. You are acting selfish, cold, and frankly, unhinged. I know this is not you. This is the influence of that lawyer your grandfather used. Corinne Vega is poisoning you against your own blood. She wants to build the estate for fees and she is using you to do it. Come to the house on Sunday. We will have the notary there. You will sign the transfer. We will forget this tantrum ever happened, and we will move forward. If you do not, you are choosing money over your parents. Think about that. Dad. I read the email with a dry, humorless smile. He was treating me like a bad investment. He was tallying up the cost of raising a child, food, shelter, healthcare, and presenting it as a loan that was now due. He called me selfish for wanting to keep what was mine, while demanding I give everything to the sister who had never worked a day in her life. The projection was so strong it was almost impressive. Before I could process the email further, the phone rang in my hand. It was Lorna. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the decline button. But then I realized that avoiding them would look like fear. I was not afraid. I was informed. I slid the bar to answer and put the phone to my ear. I did not say hello, Savannah. Lorna's voice was wet and thick. She was crying. Or at least she was performing the act of crying. Oh, thank God. I have been terrified. I didn't know where you went. Why didn't you come home? I am safe, I said. My voice sounded deeper than usual. I am staying with Aunt June. June? Lorna sniffed. Well, I suppose that is fine. At least you are with family. Listen, sweetie, we need to resolve this. Your father is in a state. He is just so hurt. He is hurt? I asked. He burned my diploma in a restaurant. Mom, he threatened to disown me if I didn't give him money. Oh, Savannah, stop it, Lorna said, her voice dropping the weeping effect and shifting into dismissal. He didn't mean it. You know how he gets. He is passionate. He just wants the best for everyone. It was a heat of the moment thing. A gesture. He would never actually hurt you. He destroyed the only thing I had to show for 4 years of work, I said. It is just paper, Lorna cried. We can get you a copy. It costs $50. What matters is the family piece. Look, just come over today. We can have a nice lunch. Dad is sorry. He really is. If you just sign the papers, all of this tension goes away. We can just hit reset. We can forget last night ever happened like a bad dream. Forget it happened. That was their superpower. They could delete reality and replace it with a version where they were the heroes. I looked out the window at June's small garden. A hummingbird was hovering over a feeder, its wings beating a blur of motion. Mom, I said, I have a question. What is it? Honey? She asked, hearing the calmness in my voice and mistaking it for capitulation. If I had signed those papers last night, I asked slowly, would you have stopped him from burning my diploma? There was silence on the other end of the line. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. I could hear her breathing. I could hear the clock ticking in June's kitchen. If she said yes, she was admitting she had the power to stop him, but chose not to use it until she got paid. If she said no, she was admitting that his rage was uncontrollable, and she was complicit in his abuse. There was no good answer, so she gave me the only answer she had: silence. That is what I thought, I said. Savannah, wait. I hung up. I did not slam the phone down. I just tapped the red button. I sat there for a moment, letting the realization settle in. My mother did not love me enough to protect me. She only loved me enough to manage me. She was not a victim of my father's temper. She was his PR manager. I stood up and walked to the small dining table where I had set up my laptop. I opened the lid. The screen glowed to life. I opened a new email to Corinne Vega. My fingers flew across the keys, typing with a speed fueled by adrenaline. Subject: incident report. Graduation dinner. Dear Corinne, you were right. They did not wait until next week. Last night at the Gilded Oak, my father presented me with a transfer agreement drafted by a different law firm. It was an attempt to bypass the trust entirely when I refused to sign. The situation escalated immediately. My father became verbally abusive. He claimed I was ungrateful and unworthy. Then, in front of the entire restaurant, he took my university diploma and set it on fire with a lighter. He stated, "If you do not respect this family, you do not deserve anything this family paid for." I walked out. I did not sign anything. I am currently safe at my aunt's house, Savannah. I hit send. I went to the kitchen to pour myself a cup of coffee. My hands were steady as I lifted the pot before I could even add the milk. My laptop pinged. Corinne was awake. From Corinne Vega. Subject: Incident report. Graduation dinner. Savannah. I am sorry you had to go through that. But professionally speaking, you did exactly what you needed to do. You held the line. We will be using the events of last night as primary evidence regarding the no coercion clause. I have already sent a subpoena to the Gilded Oak, requesting the security footage from their dining room cameras for the time window of your dinner. Given that it is a high-end establishment, their coverage will be high definition. Do not engage with them further. Do not reply to their emails. Do not answer their calls. Silence is your best strategy now. We meet on Monday to drop the hammer. Stay safe. Corinne. I felt a wave of relief so strong it almost made my knees buckle. The security footage. Of course, Grandfather Edward's lawyer was 5 steps ahead. My father thought he had performed a power play in private, but he had actually performed a felony on tape. Coffee. I turned around. Aunt June was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. She was wearing a worn floral robe and holding a plate of warm blueberry muffins. Her gray hair was messy and her face was lined with sleep. But her eyes were kind. She did not look like Richard. She did not look like Lorna. She looked like the sister Edward had always spoken fondly of. Thank you, I said, taking the mug she offered. We sat at the small kitchen table. June did not ask me why I was there. She did not ask what had happened. She just pushed the plate of muffins toward me. Eat, she commanded gently. You look like you haven't eaten a real meal in a week. I took a bite. It tasted like butter and comfort. I am sorry to intrude like this, I said. I didn't know where else to go. June smiled, sipping her tea. You are not intruding. Savannah, you are landing. She looked at me over the rim of her cup. Your grandfather called me. You know, about a month before he passed. I stopped chewing. He did. He told me that things might get ugly, June said. Her voice was matter-of-fact. He told me that Richard and Lorna had lost their way a long time ago. He was worried about you. He said, June, someday that girl is going to need a place to land on her feet where nobody is asking her for a check. I promised him I would keep the kettle warm. Tears pricked my eyes. Real tears this time. Not the tears of frustration or anger, but the tears of being seen. Even from the grave. Edward was taking care of me. He had set up the legal protection with Corinne, and he had set up the emotional sanctuary with June. He knew, I whispered. He knew, June agreed. He knew you were the strong one, but even the strong ones need a pit stop. She reached out and patted my hand. You stay here as long as you need. I unplugged the landline so they cannot call here, and if Richard comes to the door, I have a cast iron skillet and very little patience for his nonsense. I laughed. It was a rusty, shaky sound, but it was a laugh. I looked at my phone, which was still vibrating on the table. Another text from Brielle, another email from Richard, another missed call from Lorna. I picked it up. Are you going to answer that? June asked. No, I said. I pressed the power button on the side of the phone and held it down. The screen went black. The vibration stopped. I placed the phone face down on the table for years. I had thought silence was something that happened to me. I thought it was the result of being ignored, of being spoken over, of being erased. But as I sat there in June's sunlit kitchen, with the taste of blueberries in my mouth and the knowledge that a subpoena was currently making its way to the Gilded Oak, I realized I had been wrong. Silence was not passive. Silence was a weapon. Silence was the wall they were going to crash against. I am done listening to them, I said to June. Now they are going to have to listen to me. And the only thing I was going to say was checkmate. The key to the entire lock was not in the thick legal binder I had seen in Corinne's office. It was smaller than a pack of gum. It was a silver metallic USB drive that I was currently holding in the palm of my hand, sitting at Aunt June's kitchen table. The metal was cool against my skin, but the memory attached to it burned with a warmth that defied the years. To understand why I walked out of the Gilded Oak with such absolute certainty, you have to go back to the source. You have to go back to a Tuesday afternoon in late October. 4 years ago, it was the last time I saw Grandfather Edward outside of a hospital room. He had called me to the lake house, not the main house where the family gathered for holidays, but the small weathered cabin down by the water, where he did his real thinking. I remember the light that day. It was that specific heavy gold of late autumn, where the sun sits low and paints everything in shades of amber and rust. The lake was perfectly still, looking less like water and more like a sheet of dark glass. Edward was sitting in his favorite Adirondack chair, wrapped in a thick wool blanket. An oxygen tank sat beside him, hissing rhythmically, a mechanical metronome counting down the time he had left. Corinne Vega was there too, sitting on a folding chair, a legal pad balanced on her knee. She looked out of place in her sharp business suit against the backdrop of falling leaves, but her presence told me this was not a casual visit. Sit down, kiddo, Edward said. His voice was thin, like paper tearing, but his eyes were bright. They were the only part of him that had not aged. I sat on the wooden bench facing him. You look good, Grandpa, I lied. He chuckled, and it turned into a dry cough. I looked like a scarecrow that fell off its post. Let us not waste time with pleasantries. We have work to do. He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and pulled out the silver USB drive. He held it up to the sunlight, twisting it so it caught the glare. Do you know what this is? He asked. A flash drive, I said. It is an insurance policy, he corrected. And it is a confession. He handed it to me. I closed my fingers around it. Last week, Edward said, leaning forward, fighting the constraint of his own lungs. Your parents came to visit me. They brought Brielle. They brought a bottle of wine I cannot drink, and a box of cigars I cannot smoke. It was a very touching performance. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. What did they want? They wanted to simplify things, Edward said, his lip curling slightly. Richard sat right where you are sitting. He told me that he was worried about the complexity of the estate. He said that probate would be a nightmare for a man in my condition. He suggested very helpfully. He thought that I transfer the title of the lake house and the voting shares of Hartfield Instruments to him immediately, inter vivos, while I'm still alive. He tried to get you to sign it over before you died, I asked, appalled but not surprised. He did. Edward nodded. He gave a very moving speech. He said, Dad, you know I only want to protect the family. I need to make sure the children are taken care of. I need to secure their future. Edward paused. He looked at me, and his expression softened into something deeply sorrowful. I listened to him talk for 45 minutes. Savannah, I let him ramble on about legacy and family duty and the burden of property tax, and the whole time I was waiting. I was waiting for one thing. What were you waiting for? I whispered. I was waiting for him to say your name. The wind rustled the dry leaves around us. The sound was like a whisper. He talked about the girls. He talked about the children. But every time I asked for specifics, which child needs what? Richard. He only talked about Brielle. He talked about her art, her studio, her delicate nature, her need for a safety net. Edward took a deep, shuddering breath. Not once. In nearly an hour of begging for my money. Did your father mention you? You were not a person to him. You were just part of the plural noun he used to justify his greed. I looked down at my hands. I knew I was invisible to them, but hearing it confirmed by the one person who actually saw me was a different kind of pain. I recorded the conversation, Edward said. My head snapped up. You what? This drive contains the audio file, he said, tapping my hand. It is legal. One-party consent state. Corinne has verified it. You can hear him promising to take care of everyone while systematically excluding you from every financial plan he proposed. Corinne cleared her throat. She shifted in her chair. Her face serious. Savannah, the recording is important, but it is just context. The real reason we are here is to explain the trigger mechanism in the trust. Trigger mechanism? I asked. We told you about the no coercion clause, Corinne said. We told you that if they pressure you, they lose their beneficiary status. But we did not tell you where that money goes if they forfeit it. I frowned. I assumed it would just revert to me or stay in the principal of the trust. Edward shook his head. A small, mischievous smile played on his lips. No, that would be too easy if the money just went to you. They would hate you forever. They would say you stole it. They would spend the rest of their lives suing you, claiming you manipulated the terms for your own gain. So where does it go? I asked. Edward looked out at the lake. If Richard, Lorna, or Brielle violate the no coercion clause if they try to force your hand and trigger, the forfeiture, their share of the estate does not go to you, it leaves the family entirely. He turned back to me. It automatically transfers to a dormant charitable entity I established last month, the Edward Hart Science Scholarship Fund. My mouth fell open. You are giving it to charity. Specifically, Corinne clarified, reading from her notes. The funds will be used to provide full-ride scholarships for female students pursuing degrees in data science and engineering who come from low-income backgrounds and lack family support. I stared at them. The brilliance of it was terrifying. Do you see? Edward asked softly. If they attack you, they do not just lose the money. They lose it to 1,000 girls who are exactly who you used to be. They lose it to the very people they think are beneath them. Grandpa, I said, my voice shaking. That is nuclear. If they find out, they will lose their minds. That is millions of dollars. It is only nuclear if they push the button, Edward said firmly. That is the beauty of it. If they treat you with respect, if they accept your leadership, if they are kind, if they act like a family, they keep their share, they get the income, Get the lake house access, they get everything they want. He leaned forward, gripping the arm of his chair with a hand that was mostly bone and translucent skin. It is not cruel, Savannah, it is a mirror. They decide what they lose by how they treat you. If they are greedy, they lose everything. If they are kind, they keep it. I am simply letting their own character determine their financial future. But why? I asked, tears stinging my eyes. Why go to all this trouble? Why not just leave it to me and be done with it? Because, Edward said, his voice thick with emotion, I needed to make sure that when they choose money over you, and they will, Savannah, I am sorry, but they will. I want that money to go to someone who would have been you if they had raised you right. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was weak, but the heat of his skin was real. I cannot buy you a new childhood, he whispered. I cannot buy you parents who appreciate you. But I can make sure that their greed fuels the future of someone else who is sitting in a garage somewhere, soldering a circuit board, waiting for someone to notice them. I let the tears fall then. I cried for the little girl who stood alone at the science fair. I cried for the teenager who paid for her own textbooks. And I cried for this old man who loved me enough to turn his entire legacy into a shield to protect me. You have to promise me 2 things, Edward said, waiting for me to compose myself. Anything. I choked out. First, he said, you cannot tell them, not a word, not a hint. If they know about the scholarship trigger, they will behave perfectly just to get the money, and then they will make your life miserable the second the checks clear. They have to reveal their true nature while they think they still have a chance to win. I promise, I said, I will not say a word. Second, he said, when it happens, when they corner you, when they scream, when they threaten you, do not explain, you do not justify, you do not argue, you just let the truth speak. You walk away, and you let Corinne handle the paperwork. I promise, I repeated. Good, Edward said. He settled back into his chair, looking exhausted, but lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from his chest. They think they are playing chess with me, he murmured, closing his eyes against the sinking sun. They think I am just a pawn they can knock over once I am in the grave. They forgot that I taught you how to see the whole board. They forgot that the most dangerous piece in the game is the one they never bothered to guard. He opened his eyes one last time and looked at me. You are the queen on this board. Savannah, never let them treat you like a pawn. That was the last real conversation we had. A week later, he went into the hospital. 2 weeks after that, he was gone. Now, sitting in Aunt June's kitchen, I plugged the silver USB drive into my laptop. The computer chimed as it recognized the device. I opened the folder. There were 3 files. 1. Trust Amendment Final, PDF. 2. Scholarship Bylaws, PDF. 3. Richard Visit Audio, MP3. I put my headphones on. I hesitated for a second, my finger hovering over the play button on the audio file. I did not need to hear it to know it was true. I had lived the truth of their neglect my whole life. But I clicked play anyway. There was a hiss of static, and then the sound of chairs scraping against a wooden floor. Dad, you are looking tired. Richard's voice came through the headphones, smooth and fake. We just want to help lift the burden. We are so worried about the estate, Lorna's voice added. We just want to make sure the girls are safe. Which girls? Edward's voice rasped on the recording. You know, Richard said quickly. Brielle and everyone. But Brielle, she is so fragile. Dad, she needs the security. I listened to the silence that followed on the tape, the silence where my name should have been. Then I heard Edward's voice again, strong and clear from 4 years ago. I will take it under advisement. I stopped the recording. I took the headphones off. I looked at the morning sun streaming onto June's kitchen table. I did not feel sad anymore. I felt steel in my spine. My father had burned my diploma because he thought it was the only thing giving me value. He thought he could strip me of my worth by destroying a piece of paper. He had no idea that by trying to steal my inheritance, he had just donated his entire fortune to 1,000 girls who were exactly like me. He hadn't just disinherited himself. He had become the biggest unwitting philanthropist in the history of the state. I closed the laptop. I picked up my cold coffee and took a sip. Check, I whispered to the empty room. Your move, Dad? The sky over Harborview was an insultingly bright shade of blue. It was the kind of Tuesday morning that belonged on a postcard, with the Pacific Ocean glittering, like crushed diamonds, and the seagulls tracing lazy white arcs against the horizon. It felt wrong. The weather should have been gray. It should have been raining. The atmosphere should have matched the funeral procession that was currently marching toward the glass doors of Vega and Associates. I arrived 15 minutes early. I parked my car, a reliable 4-year-old sedan that Richard had once called embarrassingly sensible, between a black Porsche and a silver Mercedes. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I was not wearing the navy dress from the dinner. Today, I was wearing a charcoal gray blazer and a white silk blouse. It was an outfit that said I was not here to be scolded. I was here to do business. I took the elevator up to the 4th floor. The office of Vega and Associates was a study and intimidation through minimalism. The waiting area had no magazines, no television, and no soft music. It was just polished concrete floors, abstract art that looked like bruised fruit, and a wall of glass that offered a panoramic view of the harbor. It was a place where serious money was managed, and where frivolous people were usually asked to leave. Corinne Vega was waiting for me in the main conference room. "Good morning, Savannah," she said. She did not hug me. She did not offer me a pitting smile. She shook my hand firmly, her grip communicating a professional solidarity that was worth more than 1,000 hugs. "Good morning, Corinne," I said. "Are we ready?" "We are," she replied. She gestured to the table. It was a long slab of reclaimed walnut, polished to a mirror shine. At the head of the table sat Corinne's chair. To her immediate right, she had placed a chair for me. This seating arrangement was deliberate. In every family meeting we had ever had with school principals, with guidance counselors, with real estate agents, I had always been placed opposite my parents. I was the defendant. They in front of me. Corinne had placed a notepad and a glass of water. In front of her was a thick stack of manila folders and her laptop. The laptop was open, but the screen was facing her. I knew what was queued up on the media player. I knew what was waiting on the encrypted drive. "They are in the lobby." The receptionist's voice came over the intercom. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, and Ms. Brielle Hayes." "Send them in," Corinne said. She did not stand up. The heavy glass door swung open. Richard entered first. He was wearing a navy suit that cost more than my first year of college tuition. He walked with the broad chest-forward stride of a man who is accustomed to owning every room he steps into. He looked around the office, assessing the square footage, calculating the lease price, dismissing the decor. Lorna followed him, her heels clicking sharply on the concrete. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere cardigan and oversized sunglasses, which she removed with a theatrical sigh as she entered the room. She looked around nervously, her eyes darting to the corners, scanning for allies, scanning for threats. Brielle trailed in splattered jeans that were designer-made to look dirty and a loose linen top. She was typing furiously on her phone, not even looking up as she walked through the door. "Good morning," Richard announced. His voice was too loud for the acoustic space. He walked toward the head of the table, expecting Corinne to stand and greet him. She did not move. She simply gestured to the 3 chairs on the opposite side of the table. "Please have a seat," Corinne said. Richard blinked, his rhythm disrupted. He looked at me. For a second his eyes narrowed. He saw where I was sitting. He saw the alignment. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, but he smoothed it over instantly. He pulled out the center chair and sat down. Lorna took the seat to his left. Brielle fell into the chair on his right, finally looking up from her screen. "Can we make this quick?" Brielle asked, blowing a strand of hair out of her eyes. "I have a Zoom call at 2 with the interior designer for the studio build-out. We need to finalize the lighting fixtures for the loft. And if I miss the window, the shipping from Italy gets delayed by 6 weeks." She said this with total confidence. She was speaking about a property she did not own, paid for with money she had not received based on a legal assumption that was about to evaporate. "We will take as much time as is necessary," Corinne said. Her voice was cool, like the surface of the table. Richard cleared his throat. He placed his hands on the table, clasping them together. He turned his charm on, the high-wattage smile he used on investors. "Ms. Vega," he began. "I know we are technically here for a formal reading, but I think we can all agree that we can expedite the process. There was a bit of a misunderstanding at dinner last week." He glanced at me, his smile tightening just a fraction. "My daughter and I had a passionate disagreement." He continued. "Emotions were high. It was a stressful week. We have all had time to cool off. I am sure Savannah realizes that her reaction was a bit dramatic." I did not blink. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting in my lap. I did not defend myself. I did not correct him. I let his words hang in the air, testifying to his own arrogance. Lorna chimed in, leaning forward. She put on her soft maternal voice, the one she used when she wanted to manipulate a teacher into changing a grade. "Exactly. We just want to put that ugly night behind us. We are a family. We love Savannah. We do not want to burden her with the complexities of managing a company like Hartfield Instruments. It is too much for a young girl with a full-time job. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. Savannah, honey, we just want to help you. If you just sign a limited power of attorney today, Daddy can handle all the boring legal stuff for the estate. You can just enjoy your life. You can go back to your data analysis and not worry about lawyers and taxes. Doesn't that sound better? I am quite comfortable with lawyers. I said. My voice was calm. Richard let out a short dismissive laugh. Savannah, please let us be adults here. You know nothing about corporate was designed to protect you from your own inexperience. The document you brought to dinner was drafted by a firm that does not represent this trust. Corinne cut in. Her voice was not loud, but it had an edge to it that silenced Richard instantly. And it attempted to transfer assets that are not yours to take. Richard's smile faltered. He shifted in his chair. I am the father. I am merely facilitating the transition of my father's wealth to the appropriate parties. The appropriate parties, Corinne repeated. She opened the top folder on her stack. That is exactly what we are here to determine. Look, Brielle groaned, tapping her nails on the table. Can I just sign where I need to sign so I can get the wire transfer initiated? The realtor is literally texting me right now asking for the landlord was a legal argument. There will be no wire transfers today. Miss Hayes, Corinne said. Brielle froze. What? This meeting is not a disbursement meeting, Corinne explained. This meeting is a compliance review. Richard sat up straighter. The charm was evaporating, replaced by the red-faced aggression I had seen at the restaurant. Now listen here. I am the executor of... You are not the executor, Corinne corrected him. You are a beneficiary. There is a significant legal distinction, and as a beneficiary, your rights are subject to the terms and conditions established by Mr. Edward Hart. I know the terms, Richard snapped. I wrote half of them with him. You wrote nothing, I said. Richard's head whipped around to face me. Excuse me, you wrote nothing. I repeated. Grandpa Edward wrote this, trust alone. With Corinne, you were never in the room. Dad, you were never invited. I was his son, Richard shouted. The sound echoed off the glass walls. I ran his company for 5 years. You occupied a chair, I said. There is a difference. Lorna reached out and touched Richard's arm. Richard, calm down. She is just trying to provoke you. Remember your blood pressure. She turned to Corinne with a tight, strained smile. Miss Vega, surely we can resolve this amicably. Savannah is just, she is hurt because she feels left out. We understand that. We are willing to make concessions. We can set up a small cash fund for her, maybe $10,000. For a down payment on a condo, $10,000, the company was worth millions. The lake house was worth $2 million alone, and she was offering me $10,000 like it was a king's ransom, expecting me to be grateful. That will not be necessary, Corinne said. Then what do you want? Richard demanded. Stop playing games. What is the holdup? Corinne placed her hand on the laptop. She did not open it yet. She just rested her hand on the lid. The trust has specific provisions regarding the conduct of beneficiaries, Corinne said. Mr. Hart was very specific about the culture of the family he was leaving behind. He included a clause, Article 14, Section C, which we refer to as the no coercion clause. Richard waved his hand dismissively. Standard boilerplate. I know what it says. Don't pressure the trustee. Fine. We haven't pressured anyone. We have had discussions. Family discussions. Discussions. Corinne said flatly. Yes, Richard said. We are guiding her. That is what parents do. And the events of last Friday night? Corinne asked. At the Gilded Oak, would you characterize that as guidance? The room went very quiet. The air conditioning hummed a low, monotonous note. Richard stiffened. He looked at me. His eyes cold and hard. He realized perhaps for the first time that I had told her, but he was arrogant. He assumed it was my word against his. He assumed that without a police report, without witnesses who were willing to testify against a prominent businessman, it was just hearsay. That was a private dinner, Richard said slowly. Arguments happen. People get emotional. It has no bearing on the legal standing of the estate. Yeah? Brielle added, rolling her eyes. He just yelled a little. Savannah is just being a snowflake about it. She is so sensitive. He burned my diploma, I said. It was a piece of paper, Richard exploded. It was a dramatic gesture to show you that you were focusing on the wrong things. I was trying to teach you a lesson about values. You burned her property, Corinne said, writing something down on her notepad. And you issued an ultimatum. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Hayes, But did you not say, if you do not respect this family, you do not deserve anything this family paid for? Richard's face went pale. I don't recall the exact phrasing. I do, I said. It is your word against mine. Richard sneered. And who is a judge going to believe, the hysterical daughter who ran away from dinner? Or the father who has supported her for 20 years? Corinne stopped writing. She looked at Richard. Then she looked at Lorna. Then she looked at Brielle. You seem to be under the impression, Corinne said, that we are negotiating. We are negotiating. Richard slammed his hand on the table. I am telling you to release the funds. Corinne shook her head slightly. No, Mr. Hayes, we are not negotiating. We are simply informing you of the consequences of your actions. She rotated the laptop slowly. The aluminum casing scraped softly against the polished wood. She positioned the screen so it was facing the three of them directly. Today is only to review Mr. Edward Hart's instructions in full, Corinne said. And to review the evidence that proves those instructions have been violated. She did not press play yet. She let the black screen sit there, a dark mirror reflecting their confused, angry faces. I watched them. Lorna was twisting a ring on her finger, her eyes darting between the laptop and my face. She was beginning to sense that something was wrong. The predator's instinct in her was twitching. Brielle was looking at the laptop with a bored expression, clearly, wondering why we were watching a movie instead of signing checks. And Richard was staring at the computer with a mixture of contempt and unease. He was a man who had spent his life bullying people into submission. He did not know what to do when the person across the table refused to flinch. I took a sip of water. The glass was cool in my hand. Are we watching a PowerPoint? Brielle asked, breaking the silence. Because my designer is texting me again. She says if I don't approve the marble for the countertops by 3, we lose the lot. You do not need to worry about the marble. Brielle, I said softly. Why not? She snapped. Because, I said, leaning back in my chair. You are not going to have a kitchen to put it in. Richard's head snapped toward me. Watch your tone. Corinne reached out and pressed the spacebar. The room filled with the digital silence of a video file initializing. And then, on the screen, the timestamp appeared. Friday, May 14th, 8:42 p.m., camera 4, the Gilded Oak dining room. Richard's face went from red to the color of old ash. Lorna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Brielle dropped her phone. It clattered loudly against the table. But nobody looked at it. They were all looking at the screen where a high-definition video showed a man in a navy suit standing over a seated woman, holding a lighter to a cream-colored document. The trap had not just been sprung. The cage door had slammed shut. And they were the only ones who hadn't heard the click. I watched the screen. I watched the digital fire burn. And for the first time in a week, I smiled. Not a nice smile, but a necessary one. The show was about to begin. Corinne Vega did not waste time with theatrics. She simply flipped open the heavy leather binder in front of her. The sound of the stiff spine cracking echoing in the silent room. She began to read. Her voice was monotone, stripping the immense wealth she was describing of any emotion, reducing it to what it actually was. A list of inventory. The estate of Edward Hart, she began, consisting of 100% of the voting shares of Hartfield Instruments. The residential property located at 440 Lakeview Drive. The diversified investment portfolio held at Vanguard, and all liquid cash reserves, is hereby placed into a charitable remainder trust. She looked up over her glasses. This entity is titled the Edward Hart Foundation Trust. The designated sole trustee and primary beneficiary of the income generated by said trust is Savannah Hayes. The silence that followed was heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. Richard blinked. He looked at Corinne, then at me, then back at Corinne. He laughed, a short, nervous bark of sound. Okay, Richard said, waving his hand dismissively. We know the structure. That is the temporary holding vehicle. Dad explained this to me. It puts the assets under a single umbrella to avoid estate taxes. And then, once the probate period clears, the assets are distributed to the family. Savannah is just the placeholder name because she happened to be in the room when he drafted the first version. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. Edward told me privately, just weeks before he died, that everything would be transferred to my name once Savannah was stable. He knew she wasn't ready for this kind of responsibility. So let us skip the preamble. Show me the real will. Show me the distribution schedule. Corinne did not move. She did not shuffle her papers. She simply turned the page. There is no other will. Mr. Hayes, she said. This is the governing document. That is impossible, Richard snapped. My father would not leave a multi-million-dollar company to a 24-year-old girl who pushes paper for a living. It is absurd. Article 14, Corinne read aloud, ignoring him completely. Section C, the no coercion clause. Lorna let out a high, trilling laugh. It sounded jagged. Oh, honestly, we know about the clause. It says we cannot bully the trustee. Fine, we haven't bullied anyone. We are sitting here having a civilized meeting. This is just a formality to protect Savannah from strangers. Nobody actually enforces these things against parents. Let me read the definition of coercion as outlined by Mr. Hart, Corinne said. Her eyes were laser-focused on the page. Coercion is defined here as any attempt to use intimidation, physical destruction of property, public humiliation, or emotional duress to compel the trustee to relinquish their rights or alter the distribution of assets. She paused. The penalty for violating this clause is immediate and total forfeiture of all beneficiary rights. The forfeited share shall be automatically transferred to the Edward Hart Science Scholarship Fund. Scholarship Fund? Brielle scoffed. Who cares about a scholarship fund that is for poor people? Exactly, Corinne said. And if the clause is triggered, that is where your inheritance goes. This is ridiculous, Richard said, his face turning a mottled red. You are bluffing. You have no grounds to invoke that clause. We have done nothing but offer guidance. You have no proof of coercion. Corinne stopped reading. She closed the binder. The room went dead silent. Slowly, deliberately, she rotated the laptop that had been sitting on the table. The screen was black. She pressed a single key. The video player opened. The timestamp in the corner read, Friday, May 14th, on the screen. Granny, but unmistakable, was the interior of the gilded oak. The angle was from the ceiling. Looking down at our table, it showed a man standing up. It showed him pulling a lighter from his pocket. It showed him holding a document over the flame. The audio was crisp. The restaurant's ambient noise cancellation had actually worked against them, isolating the loudest voice in the room. If you do not respect this family, you do not deserve anything this family paid for. Richard on the screen dropped the burning paper onto the plate. Sign it, the digital Richard screamed. Sign it, or you are not part of this family. The video ended. The screen went black for 10 seconds. Nobody breathed. The only sound in the conference room was the whir of the laptop's cooling fan. I looked at my father. He was staring at the blank screen. His mouth slightly open. His skin, the color of old parchment. He looked like a man who had just watched his own execution. That, Richard stammered. That was taken out of context. The context seems quite clear, Corinne said. She reached into her folder and pulled out a stack of printed papers. She slid them across the polished walnut table. Here are the emails you sent Savannah at 3 a.m, she said. Here are the text messages from Brielle demanding the studio. Here is the voicemail transcript where Mrs. Hayes admits that the burning of the diploma was a tactic to get Savannah to sign. Corinne folded her hands. This is a systemic campaign of pressure. You did not just ask her to sign. You threatened to disown her. You destroyed her property. You publicly humiliated her. You have checked every single box in Article 14. No, Lorna whispered. Tears began to stream down her face, ruining her makeup. No, you don't understand. We were just stressed. We want what is best for her. We would never hurt her. You already did, Corinne said. But Mr. Hart anticipated this. He left one final instruction. She clicked on a second file on the laptop. This time, the video was not security footage. It was a close-up of an old man sitting in a leather armchair. He was wearing a flannel shirt. An oxygen tube ran under his nose. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp, the same gray steel as mine. Grandpa, Brielle whispered on the screen. Edward leaned toward the camera. Hello, Richard. Hello, Lorna, Edward said. His voice filled the room, raspy and warm, like a ghost invited to the table. If you are watching this, it means you did it. It means you pushed her. It means you chose the money over Savannah, just like I was afraid you would. Richard flinched as if he had been slapped. I knew you would try to take it from her. Edward continued. You think leadership is about control. You think wealth is about status. That is why I could not leave the company to you. You would have gutted it for parts to buy shiny things. Edward paused to cough, and the sound was painful to hear. I felt a lump rise in my throat. I chose Savannah, he said, looking straight into the lens, because she knows what it feels like to be left out. She knows what it is like to sit at a table and be ignored, because she knows that pain. She won't inflict it lightly on anyone else. She has a conscience. You have an appetite. He leaned back. If you are seeing this, you have tried to bully her, and because of that, You have proven that you do not deserve the legacy I built. So, I am taking it away. Not to give to Savannah, she doesn't need my money to be great, but to give to people who actually need a chance. The video, Edward smiled. It was a sad, knowing smile. You thought you were playing chess with me. You forgot I taught her how to see the whole board. Goodbye, son. The video of a world shattering. No, Brielle shrieked. It was a raw, ugly sound. She stood up, knocking her chair over. You can't do this. My studio. I promised them the money. I already hired the contractors. She burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. She wasn't crying for her grandfather. She wasn't crying for the rift in the family. She was crying because the check had bounced. Richard slammed his fist onto the table. This is fraud, he roared, pointing a shaking finger at Corinne. You manipulated a dying man. You poisoned him against his own family. I will have you disbarred. I will sue this firm into the ground. Lorna reached across the table, grabbing from my hand. I pulled it back. Savannah, please, she begged, her eyes wide and desperate. You can fix this. You are the trustee. You can override the clause. Just tell them it was a mistake. Tell them we didn't mean it. We are your family. We only want the best for both of you. I looked at them. I looked at the father who burned my name. I looked at the mother who enabled him. I looked at the sister who only saw me as an ATM. I stood up. The motion was simple, but it commanded the room. I placed my hand gently on the leather binder that held the trust. You burned my diploma, I said. My voice was quiet, steady, and cold. You burned it to prove you could still control me. You burned it to show me that my achievements meant nothing compared to your authority. I looked Richard in the eye. He was breathing hard, sweat beading on his forehead. All you proved, I said, is that Grandpa was right not to trust you with anything that cannot grow back. Savannah, I am warning you, Richard snarled. No, I cut him off. I am warning you. I am the sole trustee of Hartfield Instruments. I am going to manage that company according to Edward's values. I am going to fund that scholarship. Every single dollar that was supposed to go to your lake house parties and your gallery openings is now going to pay for the education of girls who actually study. I will sue you, Richard screamed. I will tie this up in court for 10 years. Corinne spoke up. Her voice dry as dust. You are welcome to try, Mr. Hayes, but I would not recommend putting that video of you holding a lighter in front of a jury. They tend to frown upon parents who blackmail their children. Richard froze. He knew she was right. The video was a death sentence for his reputation. If that footage leaked, he would be a pariah at his country club, in his business circles, everywhere. He slumped back in his chair, defeated. The fight drained out of him, leaving only a bitter, hollow old man. I picked up my purse. I checked my reflection in the glass wall one last time. I didn't look like the invisible girl anymore. I looked like a CEO. This isn't me taking something from you, I said to the 3 people sitting in the ruins of their own greed. I turned toward the door. This is you, handing it away. I walked out of the conference room. I walked through the minimalist lobby. I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors slide shut, cutting off the view of my family arguing with the lawyer. When I stepped out of the building, the wind hit me. It was a strong, salty breeze coming off the harbor. The sky was still that insulting, beautiful blue. I took a deep breath. It tasted of salt and freedom. I didn't know exactly what the next chapter looked like. I had a company to run. I had a scholarship to build. I had a lot of work to do. But for the first time in my life, the silence around me wasn't empty. It was peaceful. I walked toward my car, ready to start. Thank you so much for listening to my story.